Most men have lived through a silence that demands an answer, watching a screen where the cursor blinks like a secondary heartbeat. You've drafted the message, refined the tone, and then erased it entirely, only to send it anyway. It isn't weakness. It's a brutal reality, where your focus has slowly drifted away from your own center. You find yourself adjusting the architecture of your week around a ghost of availability, replaying 3-minute conversations for 3-hour stretches. This is the male mindset under siege, where devotion is often just a mask for a deep, rhythmic anxiety. You aren't pursuing another person, you are frantically trying to outrun the harsh truth of your own perceived insignificance. By the time you notice the fatigue, you've already surrendered your silent power. A man who is chasing is a man who has quietly accepted that his presence alone is not enough. You might remember a Tuesday evening that felt entirely unremarkable, until you looked at your phone and realized the silence had lasted 4 hours longer than it should have. There is a specific hollow stillness in a room when you are waiting for a response that doesn't come. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you did everything the world told you to do. You were consistent. You were attentive. You bridged the gap every time the conversation began to drift. You treated attraction like a construction project, believing
that if you just laid enough bricks of effort, the structure of a relationship would eventually stand on its own. But human desire does not follow the laws of architecture. It follows the laws of dark psychology and the mechanics of perceived scarcity. We are taught that persistence is a virtue, yet in the landscape of the male mindset, uncalibrated persistence often functions as a broadcast of low status. When you move towards something with a visible urgency to possess it, that thing instinctively moves away. It is a biological reflex older than language. At a subterranean level, your effort is being translated not as devotion, but as need. And need is the ultimate predator of attraction. In a social environment, attention is a currency. We allocate it toward uncertainty and away from the stationary. Think of the last time you were genuinely
captivated by something. It likely had a quality of being slightly out of reach, or at least entirely indifferent to whether you noticed it or not. This is the brutal reality of human nature. We do not value what is offered in abundance. There is a particular shameful confusion in watching interest evaporate precisely when you have invested the most. You sent the flowers, you planned the evening, you made yourself entirely available. You tried to close the distance, only to find that the distance grew in direct proportion to your stride. It is one of the most psychologically jarring experiences a man can face because it defies the logic of the physical world. In every other domain, more work equals more results. In the domain of desire, your work often becomes the very weight that sinks the ship. The harsh truth is that when caring becomes your primary occupation, you cease to be a person and start becoming a service. The advice to just be yourself is frequently misunderstood and doesn't mean to be a version of yourself that is constantly auditioning for a role in someone else's life. It means that yourself only carries weight when that self has somewhere else to be, a purpose, a boundary, a life that continues to rotate even if the other person stops watching. You weren't losing the connection because you cared too much.
You were losing it because caring had become the only thing you were doing. The silent power you once held was traded away for the comfort of being liked, and in that transaction you lost the very thing that made you likable. The void you left by being constantly present was eventually filled by her indifference. The observation begins not with a confrontation, but with a gaze you never felt. Imagine a social gathering, low light, a low hum of voices. You are across the room, perhaps holding a drink, perhaps engaged in a conversation you find only mildly interesting. You think you are simply existing in a neutral space, but you are being mapped. There is an observer across that room whose interest isn't focused on what you say, but on how you occupy the air around you when you believe the spotlight is off. This is the architecture of the test, a fundamental pillar of the male mindset that most men mistake for a game. When a woman withdraws or introduces a sudden, unexplained silence, the average man perceives it as a problem to be solved or a riddle to be cracked. He assumes she is playing hard to get or being intentionally cruel. The brutal reality, however, is far more clinical. Withdrawal is an involuntary calibration mechanism. It is information gathering. She isn't consciously running a script. She is reading for a specific frequency, your capacity to remain steady under the weight of social and emotional uncertainty. The silence between messages is never empty. It is a canvas where you paint your own character portrait. Most men, when faced with a sudden lack of feedback, begin to leak information they never intended to share. They double text. They offer unprompted apologies. They attempt to resolve the tension through sheer volume of presence. This is where the harsh truth emerges. A man who cannot tolerate uncertainty, who must force a resolution to every silence, is signaling that uncertainty is a threat to him. And a man who is threatened by silence is a man whose stability is fragile and conditional. Evolutionary logic is cold and efficient. It doesn't value effort in the way we were taught. It values the silent power of a man who does not spiral when the feedback loop is cut. When she stops giving you a reaction, she isn't checking to see if you like her.
She is watching what you do with yourself when she gives you nothing. Does he collapse into a frantic pursuit? Does he vanish into a defensive, prideful shell? Or does he simply continue to exist, moving through his world with the same unhurried rhythm as before? This third path is the rarest, and by extension, the most psychologically arresting. It suggests a man who is grounded in a reality that doesn't require external validation to remain upright. In those quiet, under-leveraged moments, the hours after a message is left on read, the minutes you spend at a party without her attention, you are teaching her exactly who you are. You thought those moments were neutral. You thought you were waiting for the real interaction to begin. But the interaction had already peaked. She was learning the most about you when you thought nothing was happening at all.
By the time you realize you were being observed, the assessment is often already complete. She wasn't measuring your interest. She was measuring your autonomy. The world is full of men who are currently performing a role they haven't yet earned. You see it in the way a man holds his phone, staring at a notification and deliberately waiting 3 hours to respond, not because he's busy, but because he's heard that ignoring is a source of silent power. He is rehearsing casualness, trying to manufacture a specific frequency of detachment. But there is a brutal reality to this performance. Things that cost energy eventually show their seams. A manufactured silence is heavy. It carries the scent of effort. And over time, the human intuition, especially the female intuition, can distinguish between a man who is playing a game and a man who has simply forgotten to look at his phone.
The male mindset often traps itself in the belief that ignoring is a social strategy, a tactic to be deployed like a chess move. But true indifference cannot be rehearsed. There is a version of silence that emerges naturally from a man who is genuinely absorbed in the architecture of his own life. Someone who is building, creating, or solving a problem that demands his full presence. To this man, the ignore isn't the point. It is merely the byproduct of a massive, redirected investment of energy. When you perform detachment, the architecture collapses the moment you slip. You reply a second too fast, you over-explain a simple absence, or your eyes reveal that you were actually waiting for the very interaction you pretended to dismiss. This is the harsh truth most men avoid. You cannot fake the gravity of a man who has somewhere else to be. The eyes never lie about where the mind has been dwelling. This is the moment where the lesson turns its gaze inward, away from the social dynamic, and toward the vacancy in your own life. It asks a question that requires no spoken answer. Is there actually something you are building? Or have you been sitting in a room, preparing to build something for years, sustained only by the idea of your own potential? If you are using dark psychology to simulate a busy life, you are essentially wearing a mask over an emptiness. You are trying to trick the world into believing you are valuable, while secretly fearing that if you stopped the performance, there would be nothing left to see. The discomfort you feel in the silence of a relationship is rarely about the other person. It is about the realization that when you aren't chasing them, you aren't chasing anything at all. Some men don't need to stop chasing women. They need to start chasing something else and mean it. The most powerful observation you can make about yourself is that your strategy is just a distraction from the fact that your own life hasn't started yet. Real authority isn't found in how you treat others. It's found in the weight of what you do when no one is watching. There is a particular kind of man who has done the work. You've seen him. Perhaps you are becoming him. He is the man who finally stopped the frantic messages and the late-night overthinking. He has built a life of genuine substance, refined his male mindset, and cultivated a career that demands his absolute best. He moves through the world with a composure that isn't performed, it is earned. People are drawn to him because he radiates a rare frequency. He is a man who truly, deeply doesn't need anything from anyone in the room. But there is a brutal reality waiting at the end of this transformation. A shadow that follows even the most disciplined among us. Somewhere in the process of mastering detachment, a man can inadvertently trade his heart for armor. He learns to stop chasing, but in doing so, he often forgets how to open. What he calls freedom is frequently just a well-furnished fortress. This is the harsh truth of the self-contained man. When you train yourself to need nothing, you risk losing the capacity to want anything. You have relocated your vulnerability, burying it beneath layers of productivity and silence.
And the quiet pride of being unmovable. In social circles, this looks like a final victory. The men around him see a portrait of silent power, a man who is never rattled, never desperate, and never small. But the people who try to get close eventually encounter something they can't quite name. They feel a warmth that seems present, yet never truly arrives. He is responsive, but he is never fully reached. He is present, but it feels like talking to someone through a thick sheet of glass. They cannot explain why it eventually becomes lonely to be near him, and he cannot explain it either, because he has convinced himself that this emotional distance is what strength looks like. He has become so proficient at the dark psychology of self-preservation that he has successfully guarded himself against the very thing he originally set out to find: genuine human connection. The question is whether you have gone so far in the other direction that you have built a life where no one can touch you. Mastery over your emotions is a tool for navigation, but if the tool becomes the destination, the result is a sterile kind of peace. Imagine a man standing at the center of a crowded room. People are leaning in, the conversation is flowing toward him, and his authority is unquestioned.
Yet, if you look closely at his eyes, he is slightly elsewhere. Not distracted, just far away. He has arrived at a version of power that is undeniably real and undeniably empty, and he is beginning to realize that the silence he cultivated is starting to sound like a void. He had learned how to be needed without needing anyone, and for a long time, he called that peace. The stillness that follows a long pursuit is never as quiet as it seems. We return to that same man from the beginning. No longer drafting messages or checking for a digital pulse, but simply sitting in a room where the air has finally grown heavy. He has retracted his energy from the world, yet he hasn't found instant relief. He has found a brutal reality.
Within this male mindset, the absence of the chase isn't a victory, it is a confrontation. By reclaiming his silent power, he has removed the noise of external validation, only to face the harsh truth he was running from, the echoing silence of his own interior life. This isn't about whether she returns. It is about what remains when the performance dies. The moment a man stops needing to be chosen, he discovers, for the first time, what he would actually choose.